In July of 1944, while the bloodiest war in human history was still being fought, 730 men boarded trains heading into the White Mountains of New Hampshire. They were economists, bankers, finance ministers, diplomats, delegates from 44 nations. They checked into a single hotel. 3 weeks later, they walked back out, having quietly designed the financial system that still rules the world today. Every time a country borrows money, every time a currency collapses, every time you pay rent or fill up your car, it traces back to what they decided in that hotel. But the official story, the one in the textbooks, is that this was a victory for cooperation, a new world built on rules, a peaceful financial order. But what really happened? Because beneath the surface of this polite international conference is a much darker story. It's the story of how the United States used the ashes of World War II to build something no empire in history had ever built before. Not a colony, not an army, a system. A system so deeply woven into the architecture of modern life that most of us no longer see it. This is the story of who really owns the world's money, and what happens to the rest of us if it breaks. The setup. To really understand what happened at Bretton Woods, you have to understand the world that was burning down around it. By 1944, Europe was a ruin. London, Berlin, Warsaw, Rotterdam, flattened. The British Empire, the financial center of the world for over a century, was bankrupt. France was occupied. Germany was being slowly pulverized from the air. The Soviet Union had lost over 20 million people. And in the middle of all this destruction, one country was sitting on something extraordinary. By the end of the war, the United States held roughly 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. Not a third, not half, 2/3. How did that happen? Because for 5 years, every desperate nation on earth had been buying American weapons, American food, American oil, and paying for it in gold. The gold flowed west, across the Atlantic, into the vaults of Fort Knox and the Federal Reserve in New York. But the war wasn't over yet. And the people running Washington had a problem they had been thinking about for years. They had watched what happened after the last World War, the Treaty of Versailles, the crushing reparations on Germany, the collapse of the gold standard, the Great Depression, the rise of fascism, the slide back into another, even worse war. They had seen, with terrifying clarity, what happens when the global economy is allowed to fall apart. This time would be different. This time the system would be designed, engineered, controlled, and the people doing the engineering would be the people holding the gold. The truth is, Bretton Woods wasn't called to celebrate a coming victory. It was called because the United States had already decided what came next, and it was time to inform everyone else. So the question is not whether the post-war financial order would be rebuilt. The question is, on whose terms? The architecture. On July 1st, 1944, the delegates began to arrive. They came from Britain, the Soviet Union, China, India, Brazil, Mexico, Egypt. 44 nations in total. Many of them had spent the journey crossing battle lines and submarine zones to be there. Inside the Mount Washington Hotel, 2 men dominated the room. The first was John Maynard Keynes, the most famous economist alive leading the British delegation. Keynes was brilliant, arrogant, and fatally ill. He was also representing a country that was, in everything but name, broken. He came to Bretton Woods with a vision. Keynes proposed a global central bank, an institution above all nations, issuing a new international currency he called the Bancor. No single country would dominate. The system would be neutral. Across the table sat Harry Dexter White, a U.S. Treasury official almost no one outside Washington had ever heard of. White was not famous. He was not charismatic. But he was holding the cards. Because Keynes represented a bankrupt empire. White represented the country with all the gold. And White had a different vision. There would be no neutral currency. There would be no global central bank. The new system would have a single anchor, the US dollar, and the dollar alone would be tied to gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. Every other currency in the world would be pegged to the dollar. Every nation would hold dollars in its reserves. Every transaction across borders would, sooner or later, route through New York. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. This wasn't just a technical disagreement between economists. This was a contest over who would control the architecture of the post-war world. And it was no contest at all. Keynes lost. Almost every battle. He fought. He negotiated. He pleaded. And on the most important questions, he lost. The agreement signed at Bretton Woods on July 22, 1944, did three things. It made the US dollar the official reserve currency of the world. It created the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, to police exchange rates and lend to countries in crisis. And it created the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, what we now call the World Bank, to fund the rebuilding of broken economies. Both institutions would be headquartered in Washington, D.C. Both would give the United States effective veto power over major decisions. They called it a partnership of nations. But what it really was an empire dressed in the language of cooperation. The enforcement. For about 25 years, the system worked roughly as advertised. Europe rebuilt. Japan rose from the rubble. Trade exploded. The dollar became the bloodstream of the global economy. And the IMF and World Bank started lending, first to Europe, then increasingly to the rest of the world. But this is where the polite story ends. Because as the IMF expanded into the developing world, the loans started coming with conditions. They called them structural adjustment programs. Cut your government spending. Privatize your industries. Open your markets to foreign capital. Devalue your currency. Tighten your belt. The official term was reform. But for the people on the receiving end, in Argentina, in Indonesia, in Nigeria, in dozens of countries across Africa and Latin America, it often meant something else. Hospitals shut down. Food subsidies cut. State industries sold for pennies to foreign investors. Currencies collapsed. And in many cases, the very same loans that were supposed to rescue these economies pushed them into deeper debt. Debt they could only service by borrowing more. To really understand what was happening, you have to unlearn a myth. The IMF was not designed as a charity. It was not designed to make poor countries rich. It was designed to keep the system stable. And, by design, the system ran on dollars. Then, in 1971, the system almost broke. By the late 1960s, the United States had been printing dollars to pay for the Vietnam War, for the space race, and for an expanding welfare state. The world was suddenly awash in more dollars than the U.S. had gold to back them. France saw it first. Charles de Gaulle began demanding gold in exchange for his country's dollars. Other nations followed. The vault was emptying. So on a Sunday evening in August of 1971, President Richard Nixon went on television and quietly cut the dollar's link to gold. The Bretton Woods system, in its original form, was dead. But here's where it gets interesting. The system didn't collapse. It evolved. In the years that followed, the United States struck a new kind of deal, quiet, undocumented in any single treaty, but deeply consequential. With Saudi Arabia, with the Gulf states, with the world's major oil producers. The deal was simple. Sell your oil in dollars. Only in dollars. And in exchange, the United States would protect your kingdoms. This is the moment the petrodollar was born. Suddenly, the dollar didn't need gold. It had something better. Every country on Earth that wanted energy, and every country wants energy, needed dollars. Demand for the U.S. currency was now welded to the most strategic commodity in the world. The hotel meeting of 1944 had become something larger, something almost invisible, a system that no longer required vaults or signatures or even agreement, a system that simply was, the air the global economy now breathed. The reckoning. For about half a century, that system held. It survived the oil shocks of the 70s, the Latin American debt crisis of the 80s, the Asian financial crisis of the 90s, the 2008 collapse. Through every storm, the dollar got stronger, not weaker. But systems built by men do not last forever. What changed? In 2014, after Russia's annexation of Crimea, the United States began wielding the dollar system as a weapon. Sanctions, frozen assets, banks expelled from SWIFT, the international payment network. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, that pressure escalated to a level no one had ever seen. Roughly $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves frozen overnight. The signal was unmistakable. Hold dollars. Hold them in our system. Cross us and we can cut you off from the world economy with a phone call. For a long list of nations watching from the outside, China, Russia, Iran, the Gulf states, parts of the global south, that signal arrived as a warning. Now, for the first time in 80 years, there is a serious effort to build something outside the system. The BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the new members joining each year, is openly discussing alternative payment systems, bilateral trade in local currencies, UN-denominated oil contracts, digital central bank currencies, new development banks designed to compete with the IMF and the World Bank. Is this it? Is this the end of the dollar age? Probably not tomorrow. The dollar still represents around 58% of global foreign reserves. Roughly 88% of all foreign exchange transactions still touch the dollar in some way. The system is enormous. It has inertia. It has gravity. But for the first time since that hotel meeting in 1944, that gravity is being tested. And here's the part nobody wants to say out loud, the part that should make every viewer pay close attention. If the system breaks, it doesn't break on a balance sheet in Washington. It breaks in your kitchen, in your gas tank, in your savings account, in the price of bread, of rent, of the medicine on the shelf at your pharmacy. The dollar is not just a currency, it is a promise. And that promise is the foundation of a financial order that 8 billion people now live inside, whether they consented to it or not. The men at Bretton Woods didn't think they were building a permanent empire. They thought they were preventing the next world war. But what they actually built was something quieter, more sinister. A world in which the rules are written far away, by people we will never meet, in rooms we will never see. Bretton Woods is a chilling reminder of how decisions made in faraway rooms can have devastating and lasting consequences for the rest of us. The system that decides who gets rich and who stays poor was not handed down by nature. It was designed by men in a hotel 80 years ago. And the question now is not whether that system will change. It's already changing. The question is, what comes next? If you want to understand the next chapter, how the petrodollar was born, how it kept the system alive after 1971, and what its collapse could mean for the world, make sure to watch our deep dive on the petrodollar linked on screen now. And let us know in the comments, what other hidden history should we uncover next? Make sure to subscribe to our channel, Epic Insight, and hit the notification bell, because every headline has a past. Every conflict has a story. And the world you see today was built by people who counted on you not to look too closely. We'll see you in the next one.